The night I hit a Sasquatch going 70 miles per hour on Highway 101 was supposed to be my last run before retirement. 32 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, 3 million miles logged without a single serious incident, and I was 6 days away from hanging up my keys for good. But what crawled out of those woods after the impact, what stood in my headlights and looked at me with eyes that held more intelligence than any animal should possess, that changed everything. My name is Harold Eugene Patterson, and I'm 71 years old now. This happened in 1997 on October 14th, a date burned into my memory like a brand on cattle hide. I've kept this story locked inside me for 27 years, telling no one, not even my wife, before she passed in 2019. But I'm dying now, pancreatic cancer, and the doctors give me maybe 3 months. Some secrets are too heavy to carry into the grave. This is mine. In 1997, I was 44 years old and working for Cascade Freight Lines out of Portland, Oregon. I'd been with the company since 1965, starting as a dock loader right out of high school and working my way up to senior long-haul driver. The job suited me. I liked the solitude, the rhythm of the road, the way the country unfolded through my windshield like an endless movie. My route that October was a familiar one, hauling processed lumber from mills in Longview, Washington, down to San Francisco. 3 days down, 1 day turnaround, 3 days back. I'd made the run probably 200 times over my career, knew every curve, every truck stop, every stretch where the highway patrol liked to set up speed traps. The load I was carrying that night was nothing special. 42,000 pounds of kiln-dried 2x4s, bundled and strapped tight to my flatbed trailer. My rig was a 1995 Peterbilt 379, burgundy with chrome stacks, a beautiful machine I'd named Lucille after B.B. King's guitar. She had a 430 horsepower Caterpillar engine and could haul anything you threw at her without breaking a sweat. I'd left the mill in Longview around 4 in the afternoon, later than I'd planned because of paperwork delays. That put me behind schedule, and I was pushing to make up time. The sun was already setting as I crossed into Oregon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me of my daughter's watercolor paintings. She was 22 that year, just graduated from Oregon State, working her first real job at a marketing firm in Seattle. I was so proud of her it hurt. Highway 101 runs along the Oregon coast like a ribbon draped across a woman's shoulder, curving and dipping with the contours of the land. In October, when the summer tourists have gone home and the winter storms haven't yet arrived, it's one of the most beautiful drives in America. But it's also one of the most dangerous. The road is narrow in places, with sheer drops to the ocean on one side and dense forest pressing in from the other. Fog rolls in without warning. Deer leap across your path. And that night, something else was waiting. I stopped for fuel in Astoria around 7, filling Lucille's tanks and grabbing a ham sandwich from the truck stop convenience store. The girl behind the counter couldn't have been more than 19, was reading a romance novel with a bare-chested man on the cover. She barely looked up as she rang me out. I remember thinking how strange it was, this moment of complete ordinariness that would be the last normal thing I'd experience for a long time. The night was clear when I pulled back onto the highway, stars scattered across the sky like salt on a black tablecloth. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light that I could see the tree line on either side of the road, even without my headlights. I settled into my seat, put a George Strait cassette in the deck, and let Lucille eat up the miles. I was about 40 miles south of Astoria, somewhere between Seaside and Cannon Beach, when it happened. The road there runs through a particularly dense stretch of the Clatsop State Forest, old-growth timber so thick you can't see more than 20 feet into the trees. The pavement was dry, visibility good, and I was doing exactly 70 miles per hour according to my speedometer. right at the legal limit, maybe a hair over. The creature came out of the forest on my right side, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. In the half second, I had to register what was happening. My brain tried to make sense of what my eyes were seeing. My first thought was bear, a big black bear running across the road. But even as that thought formed, I knew it was wrong. Bears don't run upright. Bears don't have shoulders that wide. Bears don't stand 8 feet tall. I hit the brakes hard, but at 70 miles per hour, with 42,000 pounds pushing from behind, stopping takes time. Physics doesn't care about your intentions. The creature's head turned toward my headlights, and I saw its face for the first time. Not an animal's face, not exactly a human face either. Something in between, with deep-set eyes that caught the light like a deer's eyes, reflecting gold for just an instant before I slammed into it. The impact was catastrophic. Lucille's front end crumpled like a beer can against the creature's body, but the creature itself went flying, tumbling across the pavement in a tangle of dark fur and impossibly long limbs. I heard a sound I'll never forget, a vocalization that was part roar, part scream, part something else entirely, something that sounded almost like a word. The next few seconds were chaos. Lucille was still moving, her 18 wheels fighting for traction as I hauled on the steering wheel, trying to keep her from jackknifing. The trailer swung wide, threatening to snap the kingpin, threatening to roll and take me with it. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel. Somehow, through skill or luck or divine intervention, I managed to bring her to a stop on the shoulder, the right side tires sinking into soft gravel at the edge of the road. For a moment, I just sat there, panting, the engine still running, the headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. The radio was playing Amarillo by Morning, but I barely heard it. All I could hear was my own breathing and the ticking of hot metal cooling in the night air. Then I remembered what I'd hit. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and climbed down from the cab, my legs shaky beneath me. The air outside was cold, probably 45 degrees, and it smelled like pine and the ocean and something else, something musky and organic, like a wet dog, but stronger, much stronger. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, and I could see where the impact had happened. Dark patches on the pavement that I knew were blood, scuff marks where the creature had tumbled. And about 50 yards ahead, at the very edge of my light's reach, a massive shape lying motionless in the road. I should have stayed in the cab. I should have called for help on my CB radio. I should have done 100 things differently. But in that moment, some combination of shock and disbelief and maybe even compassion drove me forward. I'd hit something. I needed to know what. The walk to where the creature lay was the longest 50 yards of my life. With each step, more details emerged from the darkness. The sheer size of it, easily 8 feet from head to foot, maybe more. The dark brown fur that covered its entire body, matted now with blood and dirt. The hands, my God, the hands. They were enormous, with fingers as thick as my wrists and palms, like catcher's mitts. And they were positioned almost humanly, one thrown across its chest, the other reaching toward the forest as if grasping for something just out of reach. I stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to see clearly, far enough to run if I needed to. The creature was breathing. I could see its massive chest rising and falling, hear the wet rattle of damaged lungs fighting for air. Blood pooled beneath it, reflecting my flashlight beam like black oil. And then it opened its eyes. I've been asked 1,000 times since then, in the privacy of my own mind, what those eyes looked like. I've never found the words adequate to describe them. They were brown, a deep, warm brown, like good bourbon or aged wood. They were intelligent, more intelligent than any animal's eyes I'd ever seen. And they were afraid, terrified actually. This creature, this impossibly huge being that could have torn me apart with one hand, was looking at me with the fear of a wounded child. It tried to move, to push itself up from the pavement, but something was badly wrong with its body. Its left arm bent at an angle that made my stomach clench. Its right leg dragged behind it, useless. From somewhere deep in its chest came a sound that I can only describe as a moan, low and resonant and heartbreaking. I don't know what made me do what I did next. Maybe 32 years on the road had taught me something about helping stranded creatures. Maybe I'd been raised right by parents who believed in basic decency. Maybe I was in shock and not thinking clearly at all. Whatever the reason, I took a step forward. "Easy now," I said, my voice sounding strange in the quiet night. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." The creature's eyes tracked my movement. Its nostrils flared, taking in my scent. It made another sound, higher pitched this time, almost questioning. "I know you're hurt," I continued, speaking the way I'd speak to a frightened horse. "I hit you with my truck. I'm sorry. I didn't see you in time. I was close enough now to touch it if I'd wanted to, close enough to feel the heat radiating from its massive body. The smell was overwhelming, a combination of musk and sweat and forest decay that should have been repulsive but somehow wasn't. It was just different, alien but not unpleasant. The creature looked at me for a long moment, those intelligent eyes searching my face. Then it did something that nearly stopped my heart. It spoke. The word was distorted, mangled by vocal anatomy that clearly wasn't designed for human speech. But it was unmistakably a word, and I knew immediately what it was trying to say: help. I stood there frozen, my flashlight wavering in my trembling hand. Had I really heard that? Had this creature, this Bigfoot, this thing that wasn't supposed to exist, actually spoken a word? Or was I in shock, hallucinating from the trauma of the accident? "Help," it said again, clearer this time. The effort seemed to cost it, and more blood bubbled from a wound on its side that I hadn't noticed before. "Please." My mind was screaming at me to run, to get back in my truck and drive away and pretend this never happened. But my body wouldn't move. My legs were rooted to the pavement like I'd grown there. And somewhere beneath the panic, a different voice was speaking, a voice that sounded like my father, telling me that a man doesn't turn his back on someone in need, no matter how strange the circumstances. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What can I do?" The creature's right hand, the one that had been reaching toward the forest, moved slightly. It pointed, a gesture so human it made my breath catch. "Others," it said. "Coming. Help me. Hide." I looked toward the forest where it was pointing, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond my headlight's reach. Others of its kind. The thought of more of these creatures sent a cold wave of fear through my chest. "There are more of you?" I asked. The creature nodded, another impossibly human gesture. "Family. Will come, but scared of humans. Will run if see you." I tried to process what it was saying. Its family was coming, drawn perhaps by the sound of the impact or some instinct I couldn't understand. But they were afraid of humans and would flee if they saw me, which meant this creature, this wounded, dying creature, would be left alone. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Go." The creature's eyes held mine. "Park truck far, turn off lights, hide. They come, they help, but not if see human. You want me to leave you here alone?" "Not alone. Family close, can smell them." The creature inhaled deeply, despite the obvious pain it caused. "Mother, brother, coming fast." I glanced back at Lucille, her front end smashed but her engine still running. Every practical bone in my body was screaming at me to do exactly what this creature was asking. Leave, get away, pretend none of this happened. But something else, something deeper, was demanding that I stay. "You're hurt bad," I said. "You need medical attention. I could call for help." "No," The word came out as almost a growl, the first hint of aggression I'd seen from the creature. No humans, no doctors, no help from your kind. Just leave, please. The desperation in its voice was unmistakable. This creature wasn't just asking me to leave, it was begging. And I realized in that moment that its fear of human intervention was greater than its fear of dying here on this cold highway. "All right," I said. "All right, I'll go, but I'm coming back tomorrow to check on you, to make sure you're okay." The creature's expression changed, and I could have sworn I saw surprise in those intelligent eyes. "Why?" it asked. "Why would you come back?" "Because I'm the one who hit you," I said. "Because I'm responsible for this. And because maybe not all humans are as bad as you think." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked back to Lucille, my legs steadier now, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Behind me, I could hear the creature making sounds, vocalizations that I guessed were calls to its approaching family. They were low and resonant, almost like whale songs, carrying through the forest with a beauty that seemed impossible given the circumstances. I climbed back into my cab and put Lucille in gear. The front end was badly damaged, but she could still move under her own power. I drove about a quarter-mile up the road, found a pull-off where I could park out of sight, and killed my lights. Then I sat in the darkness, watching through my mirrors, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. They came out of the forest like shadows taking form, moving with a grace that belied their massive size. There were 3 of them. 2 about the same height as the one I'd hit, maybe a little smaller, and one that was significantly bigger, at least 9 feet tall, with shoulders that had to be 4 feet across. The large one, the mother, if the creature had been telling the truth, went immediately to the wounded one, making soft sounds that could only be described as comforting. The 2 smaller ones, one of which I guessed was the brother, positioned themselves on either side, their heads swiveling, constantly watching for danger. They worked quickly, almost frantically. The mother examined the injured one's wounds, touching them gently with those enormous hands. The brother gathered branches and what looked like moss from the forest's edge. Within minutes, they had fashioned a crude stretcher and were carefully lifting the wounded creature onto it. I watched all of this through my side mirrors, barely breathing, afraid that any movement or sound might alert them to my presence. Part of me was terrified. These creatures could easily tear apart my truck and kill me if they wanted to. But another part, a part that felt almost sacred, was witnessing something extraordinary. A family taking care of their own. Love and worry and desperation, emotions that transcended species. Just before they disappeared into the forest, the mother stopped. She stood at the tree line, her massive form silhouetted against the stars, and she turned to look down the highway in my direction. I knew somehow that she knew I was there, that she could probably smell me or hear my heartbeat or sense my presence in some way I couldn't comprehend. For a long moment, we looked at each other across that distance, and then she did something that changed everything I believed about these creatures. She nodded. Not a random movement, not a muscle twitch. A deliberate, intentional nod, a gesture of acknowledgement or gratitude or understanding, a gesture that said, "I know you're there and I know what you did, and thank you." Then she turned and disappeared into the trees, carrying her wounded child into the darkness. I sat in my truck for maybe an hour after they left, staring at the forest, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. My hands were shaking. My heart was still racing. Every few minutes, I'd think I'd imagined the whole thing, and then I'd look at the smashed front end of Lucille and know that I hadn't. Eventually, I had to make some decisions. The practical ones came first. I couldn't drive Lucille in her current condition, not safely. I'd have to call for a tow. I'd have to explain what happened. And here was where things got complicated. I reached for my CB radio and called in to the company dispatcher, A guy named Mike, who I'd known for 15 years. Cascade Dispatch, this is Unit 17, I said. I've had an accident on Highway 101, approximately 40 miles south of Astoria. Need a tow. Copy that. 17, Mike's voice crackled back. What happened? I hesitated. In that moment, I had a choice to make. I could tell the truth, report the creature, become famous as the man who proved Bigfoot existed. Scientists would study the blood on the pavement. Investigators would comb through the forest. Maybe they'd find them, this family of intelligent beings that had lived hidden in these woods for God knows how long. Or I could lie. Hit a deer, I said, the words coming out before I'd fully decided to speak them. Big buck came out of nowhere, totaled my front end. Damn, Harry. You okay? I'm fine. Shook up, but fine. All right, sit tight. I'll get a tow truck out there. Might be a couple hours. I sat tight. The tow truck came. The driver, a kid barely out of high school, didn't question my story. Deer accidents were common on this stretch of highway. Nobody thought twice about it. They hauled Lucille to a body shop in Seaside. I gave my statement to the highway patrol. Everyone was sympathetic. Harold Patterson, 32 years on the road, taken out by a deer on his second-to-last run. It was almost poetic, but as I lay in a motel room that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew the story wasn't over. I'd promised that creature I'd come back. And despite everything, despite the fear and the impossibility of it all, I intended to keep that promise. I spent the next morning walking the stretch of highway where the accident happened. By daylight, the bloodstains were obvious, large dark patches on the pavement that the passing cars drove over without noticing. I photographed them with a disposable camera I'd bought at the convenience store in Seaside. Evidence, I told myself, just in case. The entrance to the forest where the creatures had disappeared was harder to find than I'd expected. In daylight, everything looked different, but eventually I found it, a gap in the underbrush that showed signs of recent passage, broken branches and disturbed leaves. I stood at the edge of the trees for a long time, working up the courage to go in. I wasn't a young man anymore. My knees ached from decades of climbing in and out of truck cabs. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and somewhere in that forest was a family of creatures who might not be as grateful for my presence as their wounded member had been. But I'd made a promise. I stepped into the forest. The trail they'd left was easy enough to follow, at least for the first few hundred yards. Broken branches, compressed underbrush, even what looked like drops of blood on some of the leaves. I moved slowly, pausing often to listen for any sign of danger. The forest was alive with sounds, bird calls, squirrel chatter, the wind moving through the branches, but nothing that suggested I was being watched or followed. After about half a mile, the trail became harder to follow. The creatures had apparently taken more care to conceal their passage as they moved deeper into the forest. I found myself standing in a small clearing, surrounded by old-growth trees that must have been 300 years old, with no clear indication of which direction to go. That's when I heard the voice. Human. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by a massive fern, was one of the smaller creatures from the night before. The brother, I guessed. It was still enormous, probably 7 feet tall, but leaner than the others, with reddish-brown fur that was almost auburn in the sunlight, filtering through the canopy. I put my hands up instinctively, showing I was unarmed. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," I said. "I came to check on the one I hit last night, to make sure it's okay." The creature stepped fully into the clearing, and I got my first real look at a Sasquatch in daylight. Its face was remarkable, not quite human, not quite ape, but something unique. The nose was broad and flat, the brow heavy, but the eyes were startlingly human in their expressiveness. They were studying me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "You came back," it said. Its English was better than the injured one's, clearer and more confident. "Few humans keep their word. I always try to keep mine." The creature tilted its head, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of consideration. "My sister is alive," it said, "because of you." Sister. So the one I'd hit was female. That explained the slighter build compared to the mother. "I'm glad," I said. "I didn't mean to hurt her. It happened so fast. She knows. She told us." The creature took another step toward me. "She said you spoke kindly, did not run, did not call others." "I could have," I admitted. "I could have called the police, the newspapers. People would pay a lot to know you exist." "Yes," the creature said, and something in its voice hardened. "They would come with guns and cages. They would hunt us like animals. They would put us in zoos or laboratories. They would study us and kill us and make us into specimens." The creature's eyes met mine. "Why didn't you?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself all night. "Because you asked me not to," I said finally. "Because your sister, she was so afraid. And because I looked into her eyes and saw a person, not an animal. A person who was hurt and scared and wanted to be with her family. I couldn't betray that." The creature was silent for a long moment. Then it made a sound, a low rumble from deep in its chest that I would later learn was their equivalent of a laugh. "You are strange, human," it said, "but perhaps good strange. Come. She wants to see you." The creature turned and walked into the forest, moving with a grace that made me feel clumsy and loud in comparison. I followed as best I could, stepping over roots and pushing through undergrowth, my 58-year-old body protesting every obstacle. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, though it felt longer. The forest grew denser, the trees older, the light dimmer. I realized that I was completely lost, utterly dependent on this creature to find my way out. If it decided to abandon me here, I might never make it back to civilization. Finally, we emerged into another clearing, larger than the first, and what I saw there took my breath away. It wasn't a village exactly, not in any human sense, but it was clearly a dwelling place, a home. There were structures made of branches and leaves, low-slung shelters that would have been invisible from the air. There was a stream running through the center of the clearing, crystal clear and cold-looking. And there were more creatures, at least 10 of them, of varying sizes and ages, going about what were obviously daily tasks. Some were gathering what looked like berries and roots. Others were tending to tools made of stone and bone. A pair of young ones, maybe 4 feet tall, with fur that was almost golden, were wrestling playfully near the stream. And in the center of it all, lying on a bed of moss and leaves, was the creature I'd hit the night before. She looked better than I'd expected. Her left arm was splinted with carefully shaped branches wrapped in what might have been bark or leather. Her right leg was similarly bound. But she was awake, and her eyes found me the moment I entered the clearing. "Human," she said, and there was warmth in her voice. "You came." "I told you I would," I said, approaching slowly. The other creatures had stopped what they were doing, watching me with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. I was keenly aware that I was the first human they'd ever allowed into their home, and probably the first they hadn't immediately fled from or attacked. "How are you feeling?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "Broken," she said, "but healing. Our medicine is good. I will walk again in 2 moons, maybe 3. I didn't know what to say to that. 2 or 3 months to recover from injuries that would have killed a human outright. These creatures were remarkable. "I'm sorry," I said. "I wish I could have stopped in time." She shook her head, a gesture that seemed slightly awkward for her anatomy, but was clearly meant to convey dismissal. "Not your fault," she said. "I should not have crossed there." I smelled the humans in the nearby town and wanted to get far away quickly. I was careless. "Why were you afraid of the town?" I asked. "We're not that close to any settlement." She looked at me with those intelligent brown eyes. "Your kind hunts us," she said. "Not often, but sometimes. They come into the forest with guns and traps. They want to prove we exist or to kill us for sport. We have learned to stay away from human places." The thought sickened me. I'd heard rumors, of course, whispered stories at truck stops about Bigfoot hunters, about men who went into the woods hoping to bag the ultimate trophy. I'd always dismissed them as fantasy. But looking at this creature, seeing the fear in her eyes when she spoke of humans, I knew the stories were true. "Not all of us are like that," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. "No," she agreed. "You proved that last night." The creature pushed herself up slightly, wincing at the pain but determined. "That is why I asked my brother to bring you here. We must decide what to do with you." The words hung in the air. I looked around at the other creatures watching me. Some showed curiosity, others suspicion, and a few showed something like hostility. "Decide what to do with me?" I asked. "You know where we live now," the sister said. "You know we exist. You know we can. Speak. This is knowledge that has never left our family before. Some believe you should not be allowed to leave with it." My blood went cold. "I already told you," I said. "I won't tell anyone. I kept my word last night. I told everyone I hit a deer." "Words," said a new voice, deep and resonant. I turned to see the mother approaching. In daylight, she was even more impressive. Nearly 9 feet tall, with arms that looked capable of tearing trees from the ground. "Humans speak many words," she continued. "They make promises they do not keep. They sign treaties they do not honor. Why should we trust your words?" "Because I'm here," I said. "I came back when I could have run. I walked into your home with no weapons, no protection. If I planned to betray you, would I be stupid enough to come here first?" The mother was silent. Then she made that low rumble I'd heard from the brother. "You are either very honest," she said, "or very clever. I have not yet decided which." She turned and addressed the others in their own language, a discussion that went on for several minutes while I stood there, sweat trickling down my back. Finally, she turned back to me. "We have decided," she said. "You will live." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "But there are conditions," she continued. "You must return to your world and never speak of us. You must tell no one what you have seen, and you must never return here again." The last condition hit me hard. I looked at the sister, at the brother, at this remarkable family. "Never?" I asked. "Never," the mother confirmed. "Each time you come, you leave a trail. Scent, footprints, broken branches. Hunters could follow. It is too dangerous." I understood the logic. It didn't make it easier. "Can I at least know your names?" I asked. The mother considered this. "In your language, I am called something like River Stone." She gestured to the brother. "He is Swift Shadow." She looked at her daughter. "And she is called Morning Singer." "Morning Singer," I repeated. "It suits you." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I have not sung since you broke my ribs," she said. "Perhaps in time." I turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth," I said, "I think you're wrong about humans. Not all of us are hunters. Some of us would fight to protect you." Riverstone's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps," she said, "but we cannot take that risk. We are too few. A single mistake could mean the end of our people." Swift Shadow led me back through the forest, taking a different route than we'd come. Just before we reached the road, he stopped. "Human," he said, "my sister told me something else about last night. She said that when she asked you for help, you cried." I felt my face flush. "I thought she was dying," I said. anyone would have been upset. No, Swift Shadow said, not anyone. Most humans would have felt fear or curiosity, but you felt grief for a creature you had never met. He paused. That is a rare thing. Thank you, he continued, for showing my sister that not all humans are monsters. Even if we can never see you again, she will carry that knowledge with her. Maybe that's enough, I said. Maybe, Swift Shadow agreed. Now go, and remember your promise. He melted back into the forest, disappearing so completely that within seconds I couldn't see any trace of him. I stood there for a moment, looking at the trees, knowing that somewhere in their depths was a family of creatures that the world didn't believe existed. Then I walked back to the road and began the long journey back to my ordinary life. I kept my promise. For 6 years, I kept it perfectly. I finished my last run for Cascade Freight Lines, collected my retirement bonus, and settled into the quiet life I'd planned with my wife Dorothy in our little house in Gresham, Oregon. I fixed things around the house. I took up woodworking. I watched my daughter get married in 1999 and cried when she walked down the aisle. I became a grandfather in 2001, a little boy named Thomas who had his mother's eyes and his grandfather's stubborn chin. And through all of it, I never told a soul about what happened on Highway 101 that October night. But I thought about it constantly. Every time I drove past a forest, I wondered if they were watching. Every time I heard a news story about Bigfoot sightings, I wanted to call in and say, yes, they're real, I've met them, I know their names. Every time I looked at the scar on my dashboard from where Lucille's steering column had cracked during the impact, I remembered Morning Singer's eyes in my headlights. The hardest part was lying to Dorothy. She knew something had happened that night, knew that I'd come back from that last run different somehow, quieter, more prone to staring out the window at the trees in our backyard. She asked me about it once, about a year after my retirement, and I told her it was just the adjustment to not working anymore. She didn't believe me, I could see it in her eyes, but she loved me enough not to push. I thought about them every day. I wondered if Morning Singer had healed. I wondered if Swift Shadow had found a mate. I wondered if Riverstone was still alive, still leading her family through the ancient forests. I wondered if they ever thought about me, the strange human who had crashed into their lives and then disappeared. In 2003, everything changed. I was in the garage working on a birdhouse for Thomas's 6th birthday when I heard a knock at the back door. Dorothy was out shopping, wouldn't be back for hours. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and went to see who it was. There was no one there. I stepped out onto the back porch looking around the yard, but I didn't see anyone. The neighborhood was quiet, the way it always was on weekday afternoons. I was about to go back inside when I noticed something on the porch railing, a stone, a smooth, flat river stone, about the size of my palm. My heart started pounding. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. On one side, someone had scratched a symbol, a crude but recognizable image of a tree. I looked toward the woods at the edge of our property, a small strip of forest that separated our neighborhood from the next one over, and there, barely visible in the shadows between the trees, I saw a shape, a massive shape watching me. Swift Shadow. I walked toward the trees, my legs trembling, my mind racing. As I got closer, Swift Shadow stepped back, deeper into the shadows, but he didn't run. You came to my home, I said when I was close enough to speak without shouting. After you told me never to return to yours. Swift Shadow made that low, rumbling sound. Things have changed, he said. We need your help. The story he told me over the next hour, speaking in hushed tones at the edge of those suburban woods, was worse than anything I could have imagined. A hunting party had found them, not random hikers or curious researchers, but an organized group of men with guns and traps, and the specific intention of capturing a Sasquatch. They'd been tracking the family for months, setting up cameras, learning their patterns, and 3 weeks ago they'd succeeded in trapping one of them. Morning Singer. She had been checking a fishing spot near a creek when they ambushed her. They'd used a net launcher, the kind designed for capturing large animals, and tranquilizer darts. By the time Swift Shadow and the others realized what was happening, she was already unconscious and being loaded into a truck. "They took her," Swift Shadow said, and I could hear the anguish in his voice. "We followed the truck as far as we could, but they drove onto a highway. We cannot follow there. Too many humans. Too dangerous." "Where did they take her?" I asked. "We do not know. That is why I came to you. You know the human world. You know how to find things, track things. You are the only human we trust." I stood there in the fading afternoon light, looking at this creature who had walked miles through populated areas, risking everything to ask for my help. The same creature who had told me 6 years ago that I could never return, that contact with humans was too dangerous. "Your mother," I said. "Does she know you're here?" "She sent me," Swift Shadow replied. "She said you were the only chance we had." That night, after Dorothy went to bed, I sat in my garage with the door closed, thinking. I was 65 years old. I had arthritis in my knees and a heart that my doctor said needed monitoring. I was a retired truck driver, not a detective or a soldier or any kind of hero. What could I possibly do against a group of organized hunters? But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Morning Singer's face in my headlights. I heard her voice asking for help. I remembered the warmth in her eyes when I'd returned to check on her, the gratitude in Riverstone's nod. They had trusted me. They had let me live when they could have killed me. They had shared their names with me, their home, their existence. And now one of them was in danger, and I was the only human in the world who might help. I made some phone calls the next morning using contacts I'd built up over 32 years on the road. Truck drivers talk to each other. We know things. We see things. And one of the things we know is that there are certain people who deal in unusual cargo, who transport things that aren't supposed to be transported, who have connections to the darker corners of American commerce. Within a week, I had a lead. A guy I knew named Eddie Vasquez, who ran a trucking company out of Sacramento, had heard rumors about a private research facility in the mountains of Northern California. The place was supposedly funded by a billionaire tech mogul who was obsessed with cryptozoology. They'd been offering big money to anyone who could provide them with evidence of Bigfoot, and recently, according to Eddie's sources, they'd hit the jackpot. I drove down to California myself, telling Dorothy I was visiting an old friend from my trucking days. It wasn't entirely a lie. Eddie was a friend, and he did give me more information. The facility was located near a town called Weaverville in the Trinity Alps. It was disguised as a wildlife research station, but it had security that would make a military base jealous. Armed guards, electric fences, motion sensors. Whatever they were doing in there, they didn't want anyone finding out. I drove to Weaverville, a small town tucked into the mountains about an hour west of Redding. I checked into a motel, bought some hiking supplies at the local sporting goods store, and started asking questions. Carefully, casually, the way a curious retiree might ask about local attractions. The facility was real. Everyone in town knew about it, though no one seemed to know exactly what went on there. It had been built about 10 years ago, bringing jobs and money to the area. The people who worked there didn't talk about their work, but they spent freely at local restaurants and bars. The general consensus was that it was some kind of government project, or maybe pharmaceutical research. Nobody suspected the truth. I spent 3 days scouting the area, driving the roads around the facility, hiking the trails that came closest to its perimeter. The security was everything Eddie had described and more. There was no way an old man with bad knees was going to sneak in there alone. But I wasn't alone. On my fourth night in Weaverville, I hiked to a spot about 2 miles from the facility, a clearing I'd identified during my scouting. I built a small fire and waited. Around midnight, Swift Shadow emerged from the trees. "You found her," he said. It was a statement, not a question. He'd been following me, I realized, watching from a distance, staying hidden but tracking my progress. "I found where they're keeping her," I said. "Getting her out is going to be the hard part." We spent the next few hours planning. Swift Shadow had brought 2 others with him, younger males I hadn't met before. They were smaller than him, maybe 6.5 feet tall, but they moved with a speed and silence that was almost supernatural. Together, the 4 of us studied the maps I'd drawn of the facility's layout, discussed the patrol patterns I'd observed, identified potential entry points and escape routes. The plan we developed was desperate and dangerous, but it was the only chance we had. 3 nights later, we put it into action. The facility's main gate was too well guarded to approach directly, but on the eastern side, there was a drainage culvert that ran under the perimeter fence. It was barely 4 feet in diameter, too small for a full-grown Sasquatch, but perfect for an old man who didn't mind getting wet and dirty. I crawled through that culvert with a flashlight in my teeth and a prayer in my heart. The water was cold, maybe 40 degrees, and deep enough in places that I had to hold my breath. My knees screamed at me with every inch I covered, but I kept going because somewhere inside those walls, Morning Singer was waiting. I emerged inside the compound, dripping and shivering behind a maintenance building. The facility was larger than I'd expected, a complex of maybe a dozen buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Most of them were dark at this hour, but lights burned in one structure near the center, a long, low building with no windows that I guessed was where they kept their specimens. I made my way toward it, staying in the shadows, moving slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid the guards would hear it. Every few minutes a patrol would pass by and I'd freeze, pressing myself against whatever cover I could find, waiting for them to move on. It took me nearly an hour to reach the specimen building. The door was locked, of course, with an electronic keypad that I had no hope of bypassing. But I'd planned for this. I found a vent on the side of the building, used the screwdriver I'd brought to remove the cover, and crawled inside. The vent system was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and I had to move on my belly like a snake. The metal creaked under my weight, and I winced with every sound, certain that any moment alarms would start blaring and guards would come running. But nothing happened. I kept crawling, following the sound of something I'd begun to hear as soon as I entered the building. Singing. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of ventilation fans. But as I got closer, it grew louder. A voice beautiful and strange, singing in a language I'd never heard before, a language that wasn't human. Morning Singer. I found a vent cover that looked down into a large room, maybe 50 feet square. The room was divided into several cells, each one enclosed by thick glass walls. Most of the cells were empty, but one of them, the largest, held a shape I recognized instantly. She looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, her fur matted and dull, her eyes hollow. She was sitting in the corner of her cell, her arms wrapped around her knees, and she was singing to herself in the darkness, a song that was the saddest thing I'd ever heard. I removed the vent cover as quietly as I could and lowered myself into the room. The drop was maybe 8 feet, and my knees buckled when I hit the floor, sending a shock of pain through my body. I bit back a cry, forced myself to stand, and limped toward Morning Singer's cell. She saw me coming and stopped singing. Her eyes went wide with shock, then wider with recognition. "Human," she whispered. "Harold." "I'm here to get you out," I said, examining the cell door. It was controlled by another electronic lock, a keypad with a card reader. Without the right credentials, I had no way to open it. "You cannot," Morning Singer said. "The doors only open with the white cards. The humans who work here carry them. Then we need to get one." I looked around the room, searching for options. There was a desk near the far wall, probably for whoever monitored the specimens. On the desk was a computer, some papers, and a coffee mug. And hanging on a hook beside the desk was a white lab coat. I ran to the desk, my knees protesting every step, and searched the coat's pockets. My fingers closed around a plastic card, and I nearly cried with relief. Back at Morning Singer's cell, I swiped the card through the reader. The light turned green. The lock clicked open. Morning Singer burst through the door the moment it opened, nearly knocking me over in her haste. She grabbed my arm, her grip painfully strong, and pulled me toward the exit. "We must go," she said quickly. "They check on me every few hours." We didn't go back through the vents. There was no way Morning Singer could fit. Instead, we went through the building's back door, which opened from the inside without a key, and found ourselves in the compound's central courtyard. And that's when the alarms started. The night exploded into chaos. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the compound in harsh white light. Sirens wailed. I could hear voices shouting, boots pounding on pavement, the crack of gunfire somewhere in the distance. "This way," I said, pulling Morning Singer toward the eastern fence. "The others are waiting." We ran. Or rather, Morning Singer ran, and I stumbled along as fast as my old legs could carry me. She could have left me behind easily, could have disappeared into the night and saved herself. But she didn't. She stayed with me, one massive hand gripping my arm, half carrying me across the compound. The fence loomed ahead of us, 12 feet of chain link topped with razor wire. No way through, no way over, not for me. But I wasn't the one who needed to climb. "Go," I told Morning Singer. "Get out. I'll find another way." "No," she said. "Not without you." "There's no time to argue. They're coming." I could hear the guards closing in, could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. In seconds, they would be on us. Morning Singer would be recaptured, and I would probably be killed. Everything we'd done would be for nothing. And then the fence exploded inward. Not the whole fence, just a section of it, maybe 20 feet wide, torn from its posts and thrown aside like paper. And through the gap came Swift Shadow and his companions, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move, roaring with a fury that made my blood run cold. The guards scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Some of them fired their weapons, but the bullets seemed to have no effect on the charging Sasquatch. One guard was knocked aside with a casual backhand that sent him flying 30 feet through the air. Another was simply run over, trampled under massive feet that didn't slow down. "Go," Swift Shadow bellowed at us. "Now." Morning Singer scooped me up like I weighed nothing and ran through the gap in the fence. Behind us, I could hear the sounds of combat, screams and roars and gunfire. I wanted to look back, wanted to see if Swift Shadow and the others were okay, but Morning Singer was moving too fast, carrying me into the darkness of the forest. We ran for what felt like hours. At some point, the sounds of the facility faded behind us, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest at night. Morning Singer finally stopped in a small clearing, setting me down gently on a bed of moss. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice concerned. "I'm fine," I lied. My knees were screaming, my heart was racing, and I was pretty sure I'd pulled something in my back. But I was alive, and so was she. That was what mattered. Swift Shadow and the others caught up to us about 20 minutes later. They were wounded, all of them, bleeding from cuts and what looked like bullet grazes, but they were alive. "It is done," Swift Shadow said. "You are free." Morning Singer went to her brother and embraced him, a gesture so human it made my heart ache. Then she turned to me. "You came for me," she said. After everything, after all the years, you came. I made a promise, I said. I told you not all humans are bad. No, Morning Singer said. Not all. She reached out and touched my face with one massive hand, a gesture of tenderness that transcended species. You are good, Harold. You have proven this twice now. The journey back to Oregon took nearly a week. We traveled only at night, staying in the deepest parts of the forest, avoiding all contact with humans. Morning Singer was weak from her captivity and couldn't move as fast as the others. I was weak from being 65 years old and way too out of shape for this kind of adventure. We made an odd pair, the ancient Sasquatch and the elderly human, limping through the wilderness together. Swift Shadow and the two younger males ranged ahead and behind us, scouting for danger, clearing paths through the underbrush, making sure we weren't being followed. The facility would certainly be looking for their escaped specimen, but we stuck to terrain that vehicles couldn't access, trails that existed only in the minds of creatures who had walked these forests for generations. During those long nights of walking, we talked. Morning Singer told me about her captivity, about the tests they'd run on her, the samples they'd taken, blood draws, hair samples, measurements of every part of her body. They'd kept her in that glass cell 24 hours a day, never letting her feel the sun on her face or the earth beneath her feet. The scientists had been fascinated by her, she said, but they'd never seen her as a person, just a specimen, a thing to be studied. She told me about the loneliness, the despair, the fear that she would never see her family again. The worst part, she said, was the silence. Her people communicated constantly through vocalizations and touch and simply being near each other. In that cell, she had been utterly alone, more alone than any Sasquatch had ever been. And she told me about how she'd kept herself sane by singing, by remembering the songs her mother had taught her, by imagining the forest and the stars and the faces of everyone she loved. The songs of her people were more than just music, she explained. They were history, culture, identity. They carried the memories of ancestors long dead, the wisdom accumulated over thousands of years. When she sang, she wasn't alone. She was connected to everyone who had ever sung those songs before her. I told her about my life, about Dorothy and our daughter and little Thomas. I told her about my years on the road, about the places I'd seen and the people I'd met. I described truck stops and diners, highways and small towns, the endless ribbon of asphalt that had been my world for 3 decades. She listened with fascination, asking questions about things I'd never thought to explain. What is gasoline? How do traffic lights work? Why do humans live in boxes instead of under the sky? I told her about getting old, about watching your body fail you, about the strange peace that comes from knowing your best years are behind you. I told her about Dorothy's laugh and my daughter's wedding and the way Thomas looked at me like I was the wisest man in the world. I told her about loneliness too, about the way retirement had left me feeling purposeless, until that night on Highway 101 when I'd crashed into something impossible. She listened to everything, asked questions, seemed genuinely fascinated by my ordinary human existence. And I realized something during those conversations. For all our differences, for all the impossibility of our friendship, we weren't that different. We both loved our families. We both feared death. We both found meaning in connection, in community, in the bonds we formed with others. When we finally reached the forests near my home, Swift Shadow came to me. "Mother wishes to see you," he said, "to thank you herself." Riverstone was waiting in a clearing about 5 miles from my house. She looked older than I remembered, her fur more gray than brown now, her movements slower and more deliberate, but her eyes were the same, ancient and wise and fierce. "You saved my daughter," she said. Again, "I just did what anyone would do," I replied. "No," Riverstone said, "you did what no human has ever done. You risked everything for one of us." She paused. "I was wrong about your kind. Not all of you, but some of you. Some of you are worth trusting." "Does this mean I can come back?" I asked, half joking. To my surprise, Riverstone nodded. "You have earned that right," she said. "You are family now, Harold. You will always be welcome among us." I spent the next 20 years of my life keeping that privilege. I visited them when I could, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, always careful, always cautious. I watched their family grow and change. I was there when Swift Shadow finally found a mate, a female from a family in Canada who had migrated south. Her name translated to something like Whisper Wind, and she was smaller than Swift Shadow, with silver-gray fur and the gentlest eyes I'd ever seen on any creature. I was there when Morning Singer fully recovered and began teaching the younger ones to sing. The first time I heard a chorus of young Sasquatch voices, raised in harmony, hidden deep in the forest where no human ear but mine would ever hear them, I understood why her name was Morning Singer. Her voice was the most beautiful sound in nature, and she was passing that gift on to the next generation. I was there when Swift Shadow and Whisper Wind had their first child, a male they called Running Creek after the place where they'd first met. I held that baby Sasquatch in my arms, this tiny creature who was already bigger than a human toddler, and I felt the same wonder I'd felt when I first held my own grandson Thomas. Life was life, no matter what form it took. Love was love, no matter who was doing the loving. I was there for the hard times, too. There was a year when a forest fire swept through part of their territory, forcing the family to relocate to a new area. I helped them scout the region using my truck to cover ground they couldn't cover safely during daylight hours. There was another year when a logging company started clear-cutting dangerously close to their home, and I used some of my retirement savings to hire a lawyer who helped a local environmental group file an injunction that saved the forest. The Sasquatch never knew about the legal battle, never knew that human bureaucracy had saved their home. But I knew, and that was enough. I was there when Riverstone finally passed away in 2015. She was ancient by then, probably close to 100 years old, though none of them kept precise track of age the way humans do. She'd been slowing down for years, spending more time resting, less time leading the family's activities. Morning Singer and Swift Shadow had gradually taken over the leadership responsibilities, though they always deferred to their mother on important decisions. I got word of her declining health through an arrangement we'd worked out years earlier. There was a particular rock formation about 3 miles from my house, and if someone from the family needed to contact me, they'd leave a specific stone arrangement there. When I saw the pattern that meant come quickly, I knew something was wrong. I found them gathered in a clearing I'd visited dozens of times before, but it felt different now, solemn, sacred. Riverstone was lying on a bed of moss and ferns, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and the few members of other families who had traveled to pay their respects. She was barely breathing, her chest rising and falling in shallow, labored movements. When she saw me, she smiled. It was an expression I'd learned to recognize over the years, a subtle shift in her facial muscles that humans might miss entirely, but that was unmistakably a smile. "Harold," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you came." "Of course I came," I said, kneeling beside her. "Your family." She reached out one massive hand and took mine. Her grip was weak, nothing like the powerful creature who had once intimidated me with her mere presence, but the warmth was still there. "I was wrong about your kind," she said, and I realized this was something she needed to say, needed to have on record before she left. "When you first came to us, I thought all humans were the same. Dangerous, untrustworthy, enemies. But you showed me otherwise. You showed me that individuals can rise above their nature, that compassion can exist even in the most unlikely places. She paused, catching her breath. Tell your people, she continued, when the time is right. Tell them we are here. Tell them we have always been here. And tell them that we are waiting for them to become worthy of sharing this world. I will, I promised. I'll tell them. Riverstone closed her eyes. A few hours later, as the sun set behind the mountains, she took her last breath. The funeral ceremony lasted 3 days. The Sasquatch had rituals for death that were complex and beautiful, involving songs that I didn't understand but felt in my bones, offerings of food and flowers, and a final ceremony where the body was returned to the earth in a way that ensured it would nourish the forest that had nourished her. I was the only human in history to witness these rites, and I stood with them as they said goodbye, weeping without shame. Dorothy died in 2019, and I thought about telling her the truth before she went. But in the end, I couldn't. Not because I didn't trust her, but because the secret wasn't mine to share. It belonged to them, to this family that had accepted me as one of their own. Dorothy passed peacefully in her sleep, and I buried her in the cemetery next to the church where we'd been married 51 years earlier. I wished I could have told her about the other family I'd found, the impossible friends who had given my retirement. Years, meaning I never expected, but some secrets are meant to be kept, even from those we love most. After Dorothy died, I spent more time in the forest. Thomas was grown now, living in Seattle with a family of his own, and the house felt empty without Dorothy's presence. I'd sit on my back porch in the evenings watching the tree line, and sometimes, if I was lucky, I'd see a familiar shape moving in the shadows. Swift Shadow, or Morning Singer, checking on me, making sure I was okay. The visits became less frequent as I got older, and the hike to their territory became too difficult for my aging body. But they never forgot me, and I never forgot them. And now here I am, 71 years old, dying of cancer, telling this story for the first time. I'm not telling it for fame or recognition. I'm not telling it to prove anything to the skeptics. I'm telling it because Morning Singer asked me to. She came to visit me last month, the first time she'd ever come to my house. She stood at the edge of my backyard in the moonlight, and I went out to meet her, even though walking is hard now, even though every step hurts. "You are dying," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied, "a few months, maybe less." We stood in silence for a moment. Then Morning Singer spoke again. "Tell our story," she said, "after you are gone. Let the humans know we exist." I was surprised by the request. "Are you sure?" I asked. "After everything that happened, after the facility, after the hunters?" "The world is changing," Morning Singer said. "The forests are shrinking, the hiding places are disappearing. Soon there will be nowhere left to hide. And when that day comes, I want the humans to know that we were here, that we lived and loved and sang, that we were people, not monsters, that one of you was our friend." So that's what I'm doing. I'm telling our story. I'm telling you about the night I hit a Sasquatch at 70 miles per hour and everything that came after. I'm telling you about Morning Singer and Swift Shadow and Riverstone. I'm telling you about a family of creatures that lives in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, intelligent and gentle and afraid, watching your world from the shadows, hoping someday you'll be ready to accept them. I don't know if that day will ever come. I've seen too much of human nature, too much fear and greed and violence, but I've also seen kindness. I've seen compassion. I've seen the capacity for change that exists in even the most unlikely hearts. After all, I'm just an old truck driver, and if I could learn to see them as people, maybe others can too. My name is Harold Eugene Patterson. I'm 71 years old, and I'm dying. But before I go, I wanted you to know the truth. Bigfoot is real. They're out there right now in the deep forests, living their lives, raising their families, singing their songs, and they're waiting for the day when humans are finally ready to share this world. I hope that day comes soon, for their sake and for ours. This is Harold Patterson signing off, and if you ever find yourself on a dark highway late at night and something massive runs across your path, do me a favor, slow down. You never know who you might meet. And somewhere out there in the deep forests where the old trees still stand, a family of creatures is listening to this story being told. Morning Singer sits in a clearing under the stars, surrounded by her nieces and nephews, by Swift Shadow's children and grandchildren, and she's thinking about a human named Harold, who once proved that her mother was wrong about his kind. She's smiling,